So hi everyone, Yvonne Heath here with Love Your Life to Death. I am so excited that I am here with my lovely, amazing friend, Kimberly C. Paul. Yes, hello, yay,
Hey,
Kimberly.
everybody. It's
We
good
are
to see
here,
you.
yes, and we're here to talk about something we're very passionate about. We're like the elite club who are very passionate about grief, death, and dying, and creating a culture of change where we normalize these conversations. And so on this day, National Grief Awareness Day, that is something that you and I would celebrate, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a part of a club that you don't ever want to be a part of, but yet all of us will eventually be a part of.
Mhm.
And so, in my experience, I've learned how to live well with my grief. And so, yeah, it is a celebration of a day that I loved well. And that grief doesn't have a period at the end of the sentence. It's ever evolving, and you just never stop missing the people that you've loved.
Absolutely. And of course, when I say celebrating grief, that means you have loved and you have lived. And yes, now maybe your heart was broken in a million pieces because you loved, and that is what this journey we call life is all about, isn't it?
It really is. A lot of people ask me, what have I learned at the bedside of the dying, and if I have to sum it up in this evolution of one big life lesson, is that time is not measured by length, it's measured by depth.
Mm,
And even with my work in hospice, meeting families and patients, weeks before their own death, it's the depth of that relationship that I still grieve some of the families and patients that I've worked with, because they had such a impact on the direction of my life. And so, yeah, I don't I like to look at my grief and how do I turn that into an actionable task. And
mhm.
I think that's where the Live Well Die Well tour came out, the book came out, the podcast. It's like, how do I contribute, but where I see a lot of gaps. And the
Yes.
biggest thing I've learned with grief is that it creates a lot of connection.
I love that. So we just jumped in because we're both passionate. So let's go back and tell people a little bit about your lived
Sure.
experience professionally, personally, and what brought you to this new relationship with grief and
Sure.
understanding and moving forward.
Well, I was never supposed to work in healthcare. Didn't want to really know what hospice, which is hospice, that's how I pronounced it when I first heard of it.
Love
I
it.
never thought I would end up in a career like this or a field. I'm a writer. I love television and film. I wanted to tell stories through that venue. And I had moved down to Wilmington, North Carolina, possibly to work on a show that I fell in love with called Dawson's Creek,
Oh,
and they were on hiatus, and I thought, well, let me just go volunteer. And so I tripped into hospice because they had served my grandmother, and I just wanted to give back while I was freewheeling at the beach. And they ended up hiring me, and I thought this would be a short little gig to oversee their volunteers, and the 6 month thing went into about 17 years.
wow.
So I absolutely confess that I tripped into this. And 4 years into that field shift, that career shift in my life, I found out that a boyfriend, love of my life, passed away with cancer, which sort of built this concrete foundation for me and a platform for me to connect with death and dying in a whole new way. So my career is hospice. I left in 2016 after 17 years being with a local nonprofit hospice, and decided that I wanted to save hospice from hospice. And when I say that, in the United States, we're a little bit different because we're bound by a reimbursement under Medicare. And when you get the government involved with anything, it's restrictions and guidelines. And not that that's a bad thing, but it
Yeah.
can get too conservative, it can get too liberal. So you're always adjusting how you practiced. And so there was one day, a 102-year-old, we had to discharge her because she did not meet the criteria that
Mm,
Medicare deems worthy. And I thought we were abandoning her. And, about 3 months later, she passed away in the hospital with her family around her, but yet not with hospice. So I thought there's got to be some social change when it comes to looking at end of life. And so I wrote a book and created a podcast, Death by Design podcast, and decided to really go on this journey of buying an RV, cashing in my retirement, and really living minimal, and going state to state to work with palliative care, hospice nurses, hospice organizations, death doulas, churches and communities, to really to get community members to know that their voice is more important when it comes to their own health care, and give them permission to challenge suggestions from medical personnel, but two, for the medical side to take off the white coat and the stethoscope and look at end of life in a different way. And I believe sometimes the medical community gets blamed a lot when people aren't informed about death and dying. So I wanted to create some kind of pathway for them to meet halfway. Can I inspire people to really learn how they want to die? Maybe that will affect how they live. And maybe with the physicians, can I get them to look at death and dying outside of their medical model? Do we treat that differently? And maybe by doing that, we can create some stop signs in a very powerful intersection that it would give all of us time to pause and reflect, to pay homage to a person's life, but also implement the Hippocratic Oath at the end of life: do no harm. So I was going to drive to 49 states, got to 45, and our dear friend COVID-19 was like, hey, I'm not only going to ruin your tour, I'm going to ruin everybody's life for a while. And so
global grief. Yes.
Yeah, it's huge. And so I decided to end the tour 4 states short from completing my goal, and head back to North Carolina to be closer to family and friends as we go, all of us experience a new normal way of living during this time of quarantine and COVID, and do I wear a mask? Do I not wear a mask? And who am I protecting? Am I protecting me? Am I protecting someone else? And
yes.
And everybody's struggling with those decisions. I just wanted to be close to friends and family. So
Yes.
the good news is, I am going to finish the tour. It's just going to be a little bit different. And, life always surprises me. Life changes on a dime. And I believe this is just life saying to all of us that we are in control. You're not. And that death is going to happen, whether it's through a pandemic or just natural aging or a tragic accident. And the question is, are we prepared for that? And that's one of my goals, is how do we get the truth out there on the table so it's not such a taboo subject, but people can participate in their final days, whether they're fully aware or they're not, but how can they instruct people to be a part of this to start their grief journey? So yeah, that's sort of me in a nutshell. But
It's such a great
it's
story. Oh.
Well, I tell you, I never wanted to live in an RV. I never wanted to do a cross-country trip. It sort of fell into my lap, and I was inspired by a couple of friends, and it all fell into place. And I feel very fortunate to have met the people on that journey. And it really does remind me that it is about the journey. It's not the destination. um I was heartbroken that it ended the way it did.
Yes.
Suffered a lot of kind of really depression when I got off the tour, because I was so close to finishing it, and had to regroup and look around, and instead of looking down, lift my head up and looking around how fortunate I am to be not sick with COVID-19, to put on a mask. And if anyone thinks that's protecting them or I'm protecting myself, then I'm happy to do that. Little simple things to make sure people feel confident in moving forward in this strange time. But yeah, grief has been a journey of mine that is still continuing. It has
Mhm.
not ended. You
Mm.
know, it's still evolving. There's certain moments in my life, with my boyfriend who passed away. It's been 20 years, but there's still
Wow.
times that I'll get in this mood that a tear or will drop, and
And
I'm
that's
so happy.
okay.
Yeah, I'm so happy that I'm able to express and get that emotion out. And his parents are still in my life, and there's several conversations on the phone that we find ourselves choking up,
Oh,
and it makes me feel so honored to still be talking about him 20 years after his death. And I believe that's how we keep people alive, is through stories. So
oh my gosh.
yeah, so
Oh, we
we've
could
known
talk
each other for a
about
while, and
it. Yeah.
you were on the journey with me. So
And there's just so much that we could talk about, and what you're saying about, those who have been in our lives, who have died, we grieve them, but we keep their spirit alive and keep them with us. We can be the evidence that someone's life made a difference and keep their spirit with us and continue. Here you are
absolutely.
20 years later. He is still a part of your life. He is
Oh, daily life.
life. And I love all the experience you fell into. What did you call it? Hospice? Something?
Yeah, hospice, man.
Hospice.
I'll never forget that hospice nurse. She's like,
Like,
it's pronounced hospice. I'm like, good tip,
thank you.
because
Well,
it's like,
yes.
thank God you told me that. Because I mean, it's like having a piece of lettuce in your teeth, and you
Yeah.
afterwards you see it, and I mean,
And there's
yeah,
that whole grief and joy coexist, right? We can talk about grief and have a tear. We can laugh about hospice and everything else. And
yeah.
and I have to say, so first of all, I will thank you from the bottom of my heart and soul for always just showing up for other people, for doing this tour, Live Well, Grieve Well tour, or Live Well, Die Well tour. And it stops, so you're continuing to share your message. You have a beautiful podcast, Death by Design.
Oh, thanks.
I would encourage everybody and anybody to go back and listen to podcasts. She has incredible guests like me.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
book Bridging the
Yeah, and
Gap.
it's thanks for showing
This is
the
a
yes,
beautiful
15
book.
lessons.
This is
Oh,
a
thank you.
beautiful book. I laughed, I cried, I loved it. I still tell stories that are in this book, Kimberly, because
Oh, nice.
yeah, it's an extraordinary gift. And if we want to be able to live well, grieve well, die well, we need to continue to learn, right? Let's learn. Let's talk about grief and how we can navigate through. And like you said, celebrate National Grief Awareness Day. Let's have these conversations. What are you fearful of? What is stopping you? What do you believe about grief? Let's have
Yeah.
some raw, gritty, real conversations, right?
Yeah, I totally agree. And the great thing about doing that is you create really in-depth relationships. I'm really close to a cousin of mine, and everybody will see us out, you know, having dinner or something, and we're always laughing and cutting up, and they're like, "Man, I wish I had someone like that in my life." And I said, "Look, if you think it's always been fun, that
Mm.
we haven't argued. We've just argued and worked through it all. That's what you see, is the depth of our relationship. And so many people want to wash their hands with their grief, as well as people when they go through hard times. And I'm like, no, that's what makes it very, very rich, and your life very enriched,
Yeah.
to work through those hard times. And so that's what I think about grief is grief makes my life enriched,
Oh.
if you want to really look at it that way.
Well, what a beautiful reframing. What a beautiful perspective. Instead of running the other way, run towards it and say, okay. And you are so right. It is in those challenging times in grief where you connect with people so at such a deep, intimate level that you could never otherwise. It's easy to go and have fun and, ooh, this is terrific. And to just show up and be present for each other in that grief and hard times. When you get through to the other side, you have an incredible, sometimes unspeakable, this connection that can
Yeah.
be beautiful. That can be
Yeah,
beautiful.
and I think I believe that, when you tell your darkest moments within grief, it really gives everyone permission to share their darkest moments, and that you won't look away. I got an email last night, from someone that I hadn't talked to in years, and the subject was cancer sucks. And her husband was just diagnosed with cancer, given like 6 to 9 months diagnosis. And she goes, "What would you recommend?" And I said, "Figure out what matters most from this moment forward, and then center everything around that, and don't let doctors, don't let anyone let you second guess what matters most to you and your husband, ever."
That is beautiful. Well, that is beautiful. And I was going to comment, but I know we'll talk for another 20 minutes because the
Yeah.
passion flows. Kimberly, thank you so much for everything
Thank
that
you.
you do. Thank you for helping to celebrate National Grief Awareness Day. How can people learn more about you? Where do they go? And I would encourage everyone to listen to Kimberly's podcast and get this book, Bridging the Gap. This is how we learn.
Oh, you're sweet. You're sweet. You can always check me out at deathbydesign.com. You know, I give my phone number out. I give, you know, my email out to everybody. So I'm looking for connection and building bridges with other people in the field. That seems to be a little scary, but I try to not make it so scary. But yeah, check me out. And Yvonne, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you including me in celebrating this day. And it is a celebration because that's how I measure my life. And my life is very enriched, but that comes with a lot of grief, and how to live well with grief. So yeah.
Love it. Thank you so much, Kimberly. I know we'll be
Thank you for including me. Happy Grief Day.
Thank you. Bye for now.